We return now to those catastrophic earthquakes in Türkiye and Syria. The focus in terms of work on the ground has now shifted from search and rescue operations to retrieving bodies. Many people are still trapped under the rubble, and there is hope that survivors may still be found. Teams from Doctors Without Borders are in the city of Idlib in Syria, one of the areas hardest hit in those earthquakes. So far, close to 22,000 people have died in both countries, with Türkiye accounting for the majority of fatalities. For more on this, I'm joined now by Andrew Mews, who is General Director of Doctors Without Borders in Southern Africa. Andrew, can you give us some sense of how the political climate or context in Idlib is maybe affecting search and rescue operations there at the moment?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much for inviting me today. So, of course, northeast and northwest Syria, which has been particularly impacted by this earthquake, is really one of the most complex political emergencies in the world today. Already before the earthquake, we had over 14 million people in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Actually, almost 7 million people were already IDPs within their own country. It's the largest IDP crisis in the world. And that whole border region with Turkey actually only has one crossing point where you can bring in much needed supplies even before the emergency, and that is still the issue today. What we know is there are a number of border crossing points, but they're controlled by different groups. Some is the government of Syria, some of course are armed opposition groups, so it's not easy to negotiate access to really access that life-saving medication, which we really need to bring at scale into Syria.
You mentioned IDPs, of course, that means internally displaced persons, and I just had to check that, so I thought I'd clarify for those of us who don't know. This really is a really drastic time for the likes of northern Syria and Turkey. We've had our reporter Ahmed Kaji and a colleague on the ground at the moment working with search and rescue teams. What kind of work is the Doctors Without Borders doing, and are there any South Africans among your teams there at the moment in both those countries?
So actually we're primarily focusing now on northern Syria. That's actually because we had people on the ground already in northeast Syria and northwest Syria responding to the ongoing conflict. These were people that were impacted by the earthquake directly, but also were some of the first responders to the earthquake. At the moment, we've been supporting over 30 hospitals and health facilities in that border region of Syria, and we've sent a number of medical staff, including surgeons, to support the hospitals in dealing with this surge and influx of wounded. At the same time now, though, we're already starting to think about the second phase of this emergency. As you said, search and rescue is still ongoing. It's very much an acute part of the emergency. But we're in the middle of winter. We now know that tens of thousands of people, probably more, have lost their homes in Syria, are going to require support with shelter. And actually speaking to our teams on the ground, we're already witnessing a lack of fuel, electricity, adequate water and sanitation. And that has a real concern with other secondary disease outbreaks. In Aleppo, where we've been working for almost a decade actually, since September of last year, we've been responding to a cholera outbreak. That cholera outbreak is still ongoing, and now we have an earthquake. So we have an emergency on top of an emergency on top of a complex political emergency, including the conflict. So we have real concerns how this will evolve. And actually, the international humanitarian system will really have to invest for a number of months to ensure that a very vulnerable population receives as much aid as they possibly can. With regards to the makeup of the teams, actually, as you probably know, MSF is a large international organization. We have medics from all over the world, including South Africa, Zimbabwe, and I know a personal friend of mine from Zimbabwe who's been working in Syria and actually just came back before the earthquake. I'm not sure on the exact makeup of the team today, but certainly there will be people from the region in one of the two countries.
I mean, you've spoken there about a conflation of factors, this cholera outbreak, for example, the movement of people following the quakes, the ongoing risk of secondary infections and other problems. There's also, of course, infrastructure where it was before, and one wonders to what degree infrastructure was sort of well established in parts of northern Syria, but where it was, it has now been decimated. If you had one message or one kind of point to drive home in terms of the work that MSF is doing, Doctors Without Borders is doing, and where you would say the most strategic area of focus is at this point in the aftermath of those quakes, what would it be?
I think the one call we really need to ask for is that all humanitarian agencies, not just Médecins Sans Frontières, really need access through all the available border points into Syria. We need to massively scale up supplies into the country, and we need to have a green light from all authorities, be it governments or be it some of the non-state armed groups, in order to access as many civilians as we possibly can.
Andrew Mews there, a member of Doctors Without Borders, in fact, General Director for Southern Africa. Thank you for that update on efforts in Türkiye and Syria following those quakes on Monday.